Hello, sir.
Hello, good to
Thank
see you.
you so much for joining us today. So
My
let's
pleasure.
get going with the questions. We would like to know about your personal life, like where did you come from, and where did you grow?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Queens, New York. If you know where the Mets play baseball, that's kind of my town, Flushing, New York.
Sure.
My family's from the Bronx originally. And I was there in a Italian and Irish family. My dad was Italian, my mom's Irish. And grew up, a pretty middle class background, lower middle class. Many of the people that I grew up with went to public school, my friends. My parents went into debt to send me to a good Catholic school.
Okay.
So education was very important in my family. My dad was the first one to go to college in my family.
Wow.
So they really put an emphasis on education, and that was that good education that I got in good schools in Queens enabled me to move out of Queens and move up the economic ladder.
Okay. Tell me something more about your educational background.
Sure. So like I said, I went to a Catholic school. Most of the guys that I grew up with in Queens fell through the cracks of the New York City public school system. It wasn't very good in the 80s. So many of my friends that I grew up with dropped out of high school, didn't graduate. Many of them got involved with the crack epidemic that was going on in New York in that time. So got addicted to drugs. There was a lot of gangs in my neighborhood.
Wow.
So a lot of my friends, some of them died, some of them went to prison. I used to visit one of them on Rikers Island, unfortunately, a prison in New York, so I had to visit my friends there because they were in jail.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was kind of, I don't want to give a bad picture, but, it was kind of, I grew up on the streets a lot.
That's really rough growing up.
Yeah. And I knew at a young age that if I wanted to do something with my life, because I saw so much turmoil around me that I knew I needed to get a good education. So I went to a Catholic grammar school through 8th grade. And then I chose to go to an all-boys Catholic high school that was 3 bus rides away. So it took me an hour to get to high school,
Okay.
one way.
Wow.
But it was the best high school that I could get into, and it was the best one that we could afford.
Oh, okay.
And that really kind of led me up the upward path, of upward trajectory. I wound up going to Bentley University in Boston and had some scholarships which helped pay for it. And that's where I met my wife. So I've been with my wife now for 24 years.
Wow.
Been together since our first date in college, and we've got
Wow,
3 small
that's
children.
awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So you moved from New York to Boston for your education?
Yeah, so I left Queens and went to boarding, college for 4 years for my bachelor in marketing from Bentley University. And it was a little town outside of Boston called Waltham, Massachusetts. And that's where I went to college.
So how was your early career? Like as a child, what did you want to become?
That's a good question. I think probably way back when, I think I probably wanted to be a firefighter or something like that.
Oh.
But when I got to college, I started as a economics finance dual major, and I realized that wasn't for me. I then switched to accounting as a major. I realized that wasn't for me. Went to finance. That also was not for me, and then I found my home in marketing. I started in marketing research, but I really enjoyed advertising. And the college that I went to, Bentley University, is known as one of the best business schools. So it doesn't matter what your major is, you wind up graduating with a very full set of skills to run a business, basically. So I kind of knew that I wanted to run a business one day, and I just didn't know how that would happen. So going back to growing up, so in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a lot of Greek friends of mine, and a lot of their parents were immigrants that, first generation immigrants. And thinking back on it now, it's kind of interesting. I used to wonder why my friends' dads didn't work. At least that was what I thought, because they were always around. They weren't in an office, they weren't, in an office building or anything like that. In hindsight, now I understand it, is that they all own businesses. So they came here, to this country, and they saved their money and they worked hard, but then they bought businesses, restaurants, diners, automobile shops, things of that nature. So I always knew that I wanted to it was a good model for me. I said, wow, they kind of make their own schedule. They seem to work for themselves. They're their own boss. And so that was ingrained in me at a very young age. I never knew that I would wind up owning a dog kennel, which is what I own now. It's kind of a weird thing to wind up in. But I always knew I wanted to run a business of some kind. I just didn't know which one.
Oh, so yeah, I've heard that you always wanted to support small business owners.
Yes.
How do you plan to do that?
Well, there's a lot of things that we can do in the state. It just depends on the industry. But generally speaking, one of the first things I think we need to look at is what we have. It's kind of wonky, kind of policy wonky, but we have this thing called the B&O tax, business and occupancy. So Washington State doesn't have an income tax, so they tax businesses on gross receipts, which if you think about it from a startup business perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you want to encourage people to start new businesses, you shouldn't be taxing them on their gross revenues when they're losing money, which most small businesses do for 3 years. I certainly did in my business. We didn't make money for the first 3 years. So paying for gross sales doesn't make it's not very business friendly. It's not encouraging people to start and take risks. So I think we need to fix that at the state level. I think it would be great if it was on net profits instead of gross. But we do have an exemption level where if you're a small business and you gross, I think it's maybe $50,000 a year or less, then you don't pay the tax. I think we could raise that a little bit higher. That would be one way to do it. And then additionally, just streamlining tax collection. So I have a lot of friends in the contracting business who are in construction. And if they do a construction job in one city versus another city, the tax collections are different. You have to pay it in multiple locations. And just streamlining that so that you can just pay all your taxes in one spot would be very, very, very helpful.
Wow.
I think those
sure.
are two. Yeah, I mean it's hard.
It's really hard to pay
Yeah.
in different places. Yeah. It's too hard. Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, you yourself have a dog
Yes.
boarding business. So just a fun fact: how many dogs do you have?
Yes, I've got two actually. They are right there. We've got two of our own. They're both rescues. And the reason I wound up in this business was I was working at Amazon, which is why we moved to Seattle. And in 2004, I had grown kind of unhappy with my career in technology, and I wanted to do something more spiritually fulfilling with my life. And we had adopted at the time a dog called Roscoe from a local charity, and he was a homeless dog. He was abused. He was on death's door when we got him.
Oh my God.
And that was before we had kids. And saving him was the most spiritually fulfilling thing I had ever done in my life. It was very rewarding. So when I decided to quit Amazon, we thought that maybe what we could do is do a nonprofit that would double the capacity so that this rescue organization could save twice as many dogs. But that was unrealistic because I wasn't a millionaire and I needed to make money and I wanted to grow a family. So instead what we did is we created a for-profit business that gives a portion of its proceeds back to charity. And that was kind of the model that we followed.
Okay, so coming back to your career at Amazon, you were an IT person. So what
Correct.
made you motivated to get into politics?
Oh, politics, yes. So like I said, backing up a little bit, so we moved to Seattle from the New York area in 1999. And it was because Amazon bought the company that I worked for. I worked for a little internet company in the basement of a church with 40 people back in the internet heyday. And they bought the company and shut it down 4 months later. And they basically said, hey, if you want a job, come out and interview and see if you can find a place here in Seattle. So my wife and I drove cross country and we planted our roots here. I did that for almost 6 years, and that was during the dot-com boom and bust. So I was there before the bust in 2001 and then after. And I just really didn't find a good home. Amazon laid off most of the marketing department with the dot-com layoffs in 2001. I was not laid off. I was very lucky. But I bounced around the company and I couldn't find a good home, something that I thought was really using my skills the way they should be used. So that's what led me into doing my own business. And I forgot what was the exact question.
Your motivation to get into politics?
Oh, into politics, yes. So in 2010, I lost a dear friend of mine. So my best friend Andy died unexpectedly. He had a heart condition that nobody knew about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. And he was my age. He was my best friend. He was 4 years old. He left behind two young children who were the same age as my two kids.
Oh.
And I think anybody who's lost somebody close to them, whether it's a friend or a family member, goes through this. You have a period of introspection where you kind of think about your life and if I were to die tomorrow, would I be happy? At that point in time in 2010, I had a wonderful, successful corporate career. I had built a stable, mature, small business that had won awards and was really doing well. I had 3 healthy, happy kids, which is great, and a loving wife and a good marriage. But I thought I had more to give. Going through that process of loss kind of made me think, wow, I have skills that are not being used right now. And at the time, I was involved with a lot of nonprofit for animal charities. And that was very rewarding, but it's mostly around fundraising. It wasn't actually using the skills that I had. And I knew I had more to give society. So I started looking around at ways to do that, and that led me into politics, into the Planning Commission, which I'm on, which is a local jurisdictional issue with zoning and land use, and that was an appointed position. I ran for the state senate seat in 2012 and lost, but I learned a lot of good lessons. In 2013, the firefighters found me and recruited me to run as a fire commissioner, which I am now. I got elected in 2013.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And now this is another golden opportunity. So our state senator retired this year, and it's the first time in 3 years that it's been open. This position's been open without an incumbent.
That's quite a while.
Yes, it was. She was a very good senator, and she's been with us for a long time.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of what led me into it. Is I really just wanted to do more for society. I want to, if I were to die tomorrow, I want to make sure I've done everything I can to help society.
How do you plan to make a difference?
There's a feeling in this country, and I know we'll probably talk about the presidential race a little bit. There's a feeling in this country where people feel like the government and politics is not producing results. So they care about these issues, and they're not seeing results on those issues. And it's why you see a lot of people consider themselves independents now. They don't consider themselves Democrats or Republicans. And I think that the key for me in Olympia, if I get the job, is just to focus on the things that matter and not partisan politics. Because the people, we've knocked on this campaign, we've knocked on over 15,000 doors in our district. And when you knock on the door, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or an independent or a Republican or anything else, they don't really seem to care about the two parties. They care about whether or not their kid can get to school safely. They wonder about the education of their children, about the buses that they ride, the parks. All of these issues that are kind of meat and potato issues that affect their lives every day, that's what they care about. They don't care about this, two-party nonsense and partisan politics. So I think that's really going to be what I'm focused on. And I have so far in my corporate career and my public service career, is I'm not afraid to advance somebody's idea because it comes from the other side of the aisle or because it wasn't my idea. I don't care whose idea it is. If it's a data-driven solution and it makes sense for the community, I'm going to advance that goal. So I kind of approach politics and public policy the same way I approach my small business or technology. I like to look at data. I like to have a reasoned approach. I like to listen to both sides of an argument. And oftentimes the solution is often in the middle, right? And that's kind of what my philosophy is, and that's what I want to bring to Olympia if I get elected.
Sure. So I've learned about your efforts to bring the road traffic down.
Yes.
I would like to know more about that.
Yes. It's ironic. The state is under a Supreme Court ruling right now, for your viewers who don't know, to come up with roughly $4 billion for education. So it's a Supreme Court ruling, and the state is now in contempt of court. That's the biggest issue for next year's legislative session, but to be honest with you, knocking on those doors in our district, that's usually not what people are talking about. What they're talking about is what you mentioned, the traffic that they're saying, the lack of buses, the lack of transit options. Growing up in New York, I grew up around, you don't have to have a car in New York, and I know in California, you don't have to have a car necessarily. And out here in Seattle, we're a world-class city, we're one of the fastest growing tech bubbles in the country, yet we have horrific traffic and transportation options. There's no real good mass transit. And what we have in our district is they just implemented tolling on Interstate 405. And that is the number one thing that people complain about, because basically they're charging you up to $10 a trip now to get out of traffic, just to go to work or take your kids to school. And as a result of the way that they've implemented on this major highway, all of the local roads that feed into that highway are also backing up. So, I mean, the traffic is getting worse and worse and worse, and I don't see any real solutions to the problem. So, in our district, I think that's going to be the major thing that whoever it is that's elected has to work on, because it's what people care about.
Sure. So, coming to this point, what else would you like to do to the people of First Legal District?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that they need. Obviously, we started with transportation. Education funding is another one. But there's also a lot of things that people care about that kind of are smaller items, but they're very passionate about. For example, in education, there's a proliferation of the use of portable classrooms in our district. So schools are getting too big, they have too much enrollment, too many kids, and they don't have buildings to put them in. So they get these portable classrooms, they put it on the property, and that's their classroom. And that's district-wide. And parents are very upset about that. They want their kids to actually be in proper classrooms, not in these little portable things.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a big issue for parents. And then the other thing is safe sidewalks. It seems like such a little easy-to-fix thing, but we don't have safe sidewalks for kids walking to school. And so that's something that,
Sure.
people really want in our district. So I think those are probably the top priorities that I've seen: transportation, funding education, and some of those meat and potato issues of sidewalks and getting your kids safely to school.
Sure. What are your roles and responsibilities as a fire commissioner?
Sure. Fire commissioner is it's an elected position. So there's a 5-person elected board of commissioners. I'm one of the 5. And we manage the fire district, which provides ambulance and a fire service to 77,000 residents in our area. So when they call 911 and there's a fire or somebody has a heart attack, we send the firefighters out. And that budget is about $30 million of tax dollars for the people that live in this. Yeah. So it's basically, at first I said no. When the firefighters came and recruited me, I said, no, you don't want me anywhere near a fire. I said, I don't know anything about this job, I'm not going to do it. But I did my due diligence, and I kept finding out more about what the job entailed. And basically, it's kind of running a small business. So there's a 5-person board of directors, and if 3 of them agree, they set policy, we set budgets, and it's been very, very rewarding. I think that my skills, and this is something that I found across the board, is that having business skills and running a small business really prepares you well for public service, because there's not a lot of people that are elected in Olympia who have this experience. So you have to run a P&L statement, you have to run a budget, you have to make payroll, you have to know how to deal with these issues.
That's a lot of things.
Yes, and that's basically what the government's doing too with our tax dollars. So I'm very proud. Fire District 7 is my district, and we have run budget surpluses the last 2 years. And at the same time, we gave a new contract and a 5% raise to our firefighters. So we had a new contract.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we're really proving that if you're smart and you're diligent with your money, you can be both fiscally responsible with tax dollars, but also treat labor with the respect they deserve, because they do deserve our respect. So I'm very proud of what we're doing at District 7.
Sure. So I would also like to know about the planning thing that you're into.
Oh, the Planning Commission?
Planning Commission.
Yes.
Right.
That was the first thing that I got involved with public policy in 2011. And what happened basically was I have a dog kennel, like we mentioned. I have anywhere from 6 to 9 employees, depending on the time of year. And in my county, there are 33 other mom and pop dog kennels. And in 2010, right when I lost my friend, there was a permitting problem with the county. So it's a long story, but one of the kennel owners didn't like the way the county was treating his permits. And his way of dealing with it was to file a lawsuit against the county and also file a complaint against all 33 other commercial kennels in the county, so all these mom and pop businesses. And I was the first one that got denied. So annually the guy would come out for the inspector and he would look around your kennel and say, did you change anything? And if you say no, for the most part, he was just a formality and he would check it after your first year. Well, that year I got denied after being in business for 6 years. So there goes my livelihood. There goes my small business. So I had to go and get the information at the county to find out about this complaint. And then I called all 33 other kennel owners that night and said, you don't know me, you're not going to like this, but you're going to lose your permit. And obviously I was not a very popular person that night. But it did happen, and then we had to form an organization and get a lawyer and try to fight to get our permits back. Mm-hmm. And that kind of woke me up to how small businesses are treated. Mm-hmm. And then I talked to my council member, and he appointed me to the Planning Commission. What the Planning Commission does is if the county council decides to do a new ordinance, something new with zoning, something with permits for businesses or people, they have to send it to the Planning Commission first, and we're the first step in the public process. So what we do is we hold a briefing with staff, so we learn about the issue, and then the subsequent meeting, the next month, we have a public hearing. So the public can come and testify and say, I do like this, I don't like this, why does this affect me, etc. And then we absorb that information from the public. and we pass a recommendation. Sometimes we don't pass anything, but we make a recommendation. And then we take that and we send it to the county council. And the county council can ignore us, they can change things, they can do whatever they want. But we're really the public face of it. So we're the first chance for the public to come and say, I don't like this, or I do like this. And we synthesize that information.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a very hard job to have.
It's a volunteer position, and I really enjoy the public part of it. You know, dealing with the public, and it goes back to what we were talking about before. You can't make a good decision without hearing all sides of an issue,
Sure.
Whether that's business or in the public sector.
So how does the public react? Is it like always, most of the times on the accepting side, or like, or they're not good, they don't like it?
It just depends on the issue. Yeah, I mean, it could be something non-controversial, and they just come and they say this is great. But you know, I'll give you the example of the marijuana. So in Washington State, I think it was in 2012, we passed an initiative that legalized recreational marijuana in our state. And after the state made that law, it then filtered down to the counties and the cities, because they had to figure out, where are we going to allow a marijuana shop in our city or our county?
Sure.
So that came to us. So it was kind of an interesting process. So we spent.
It's a hard situation to
It
go
is.
through.
It is. You know, it was supported in our district and our county, but you know, obviously nobody wants, you know, a pot store next to their house.
Who wants it? No one.
So yeah, that was an example of a controversial one, and it was kind of interesting, that process. So we spent about 3 months on that ordinance.
Wow.
And we had over 100 people that showed up, but the people that showed up were all on the pro side of the argument. They were what we call potrepreneurs. They were people that were trying to start small businesses. It's a new industry, so there's a lot of money to be made, and there was a lot of people that came with their lawyers and small business people saying, you know, we like this zoning, and we passed it, and there wasn't a single person that showed up that said no.
Wow.
Yes, and I think it had to do with public outreach. I think nobody knew about it.
Oh.
And then so we passed something, and we gave it to the council, and they worked on it, and they passed it. And then the pot shops started showing up.
Oh.
And very, very quickly, the community, especially where I live, in Clearview and in Snohomish, they saw these little pot shops all popping up in their neighborhood, and they got very angry. So they had a community meeting.
What is a pot shop?
A pot shop, a marijuana shop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like a retail location where you can buy marijuana.
Oh, okay. So it's like a separate shop?
Yes,
for the
it's like
whole
it's like a little store on its own that just sells pot.
Oh, okay.
Marijuana, yeah.
So you guys, you had to take a step forward to reach out to people,
Yes.
to let them know that this is going to happen?
Yes, the county does that. They put little ads in the paper to notify people, but to be honest with you, it's something that we could do better. Because the public outreach, most people don't read the paper, the little thing in the bottom of the paper that says this ordinance is coming up for this public hearing, and they don't understand how it affects their lives until it's implemented, which I think is a problem. I think we could do better at that. But in this case, you know, the community realized that they had, you know, whatever it was, 10 marijuana shops showing up in their district, in their street, and they had a big community meeting with about 180 people in it.
Wow.
And they formed an organization, and they called the elected leaders down to the meeting and kind of, you know, yelled at them a little bit. And that kind of they put a stop, an emergency ordinance on new marijuana
So
shops.
this 180 people were more on the other side?
They don't want it. Yeah, they were the people that didn't show up at first. But when they saw it in their neighborhood, they said, wait a minute, maybe we should be involved.
Sure.
So they asked for them to be taken away. So then the county council put an emergency ordinance that said no more pot shops. And they're still, to be honest with you, they're still working it out. They're still trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Okay.
So that's an example. You had asked about whether or not people are engaged, and
Sure.
that was clearly a hot issue where they were
I'm
very
sure.
engaged.
I'm sure.
Some other things are very non-controversial. Yeah.
I'm sure, yeah. This is a good example. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
So, would you be willing to support legal immigrants?
Oh, of course, yeah. Are we talking about the issue in the Indian community? I know we were talking with Arun and Venkat about that. I just learned about this, how big this issue is for your community just last week. It's amazing to me that we've had people, you know, living here for 15 years and working without becoming a citizen and living under a cloud of any given day that they might get kicked out of the country. And like we were talking with our friend Arun, you know, it's hard for a community because if you're in this limbo status, maybe you choose not to invest in a small business in your community, right? Maybe you choose not to get involved with XYZ community group because you just don't know if you're going to be gone tomorrow.
I don't want to own a house.
Yeah, or own a house. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I didn't realize how bad it was. And it just seems ridiculous that you have to deal with that as a community.
Yeah. I cannot own a house right now. It takes for us a while.
And you've been here how many years?
Like 6.
Okay. Yeah, I have my wife works at Amazon now. She works in the cloud. And her boss, Amit, who's from India, just after 15 years, just became a citizen today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, he's very excited. We made him a cake, a big American flag cake, and they're having fun today.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, absolutely, but I support that. And I've also learned that in the Bothell community, my understanding is that there's been a couple of times where a member of the Indian community was put into detention and it was going to get kicked out of the country and things of that nature, and that the community rallied and they got our senators and our Congress people to write a letter to help get those people out. And I was asked by some of the people that were involved in this event if I would do that as well. And I think it's important. So I mean, as a state senator, to the extent that if I'm elected, that my name, that my letter, can influence something like that, I'm absolutely going to be a resource for the community. Because
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And this is a national issue, but I mean, our immigration situation just makes no sense whatsoever. I don't understand why we would have a quota on, people that want to come in this country, that are educated, that have skills that we can use. Maybe they want to start a business. The idea that we would say, no, you're not welcome here, is completely antithetical to what America's about. And I think, it's unfortunate that Congress has to act because they're so deadlocked and they just don't do anything. Nothing good seems to come out of Washington, D.C. It's too bad that we can't address this at a state level, because I think there'd be more impetus to do so.
What is your opinion on Trump and Hillary?
Oh boy.
That's what I was mentioning. This is really fun.
I grew up in New York, so for me, I grew up with Donald Trump on the front page of the New York Post pretty much every week with a new affair he had, or being related to the mob with his buildings, and so I have this vision of Donald Trump, which is the sensational celebrity that I grew up with in New York. So seeing him right now this close to being president scares me. It honestly scares me. At the national level, I think the last poll said 43% of the American public now self-identify as an independent. So they don't want to be considered a Democrat, they don't want to be considered a Republican. And that is the highest that it's ever been. And to me, it shows a little bit about what we talked about before, is that people feel like our democracy is not being responsive to the needs that they have in their day-to-day lives. This election, I'm supporting Hillary, obviously. But there's problems there, right? So the Democratic base, obviously with the Bernie Sanders crowd, I see it, in local politics. People are not overly enthusiastic about their choice, and there's a lot of this lesser of two evils things going on. And I think as a democracy, we need to work on that, because when you get to the point where I think Congress has single-digit approval ratings at this point, people don't have the faith in their government institutions anymore, and they don't have faith in the parties. That's a serious crisis of our democracy. And I think we need to do a lot of things to work on that. But yeah, hopefully Hillary wins, in my opinion. I'm sure some of your voters might be Trump fans, but yeah, I think Trump would be a disaster for this country.
Okay. So, what are your views on diversity and racism?
Yeah, we have to win. You turn on the TV in any given week right now, and we've got people getting shot and murdered across this country everywhere you go. Chicago's a mess right now. It's a serious problem that we need to deal with. I'm happy that at least recently that there has been a lot of public outcry about it, and there's at least people talking about it, because I think a lot of times with racism, it goes underneath the covers and people don't want to talk about it, and it doesn't help. It doesn't get better. So I think the fact that it is part of our national dialogue, that it's part of our state dialogue, is a good thing, because the only way to heal is to kind of talk about issues and learn where other people are coming from. So I think that's important, but we've got a long way to go.
Sure. Yeah.
I grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up in New York, and when I was growing up in the 80s, I lived in mostly a white neighborhood, but it was changing, and then we had the crack epidemic that took over our neighborhood. And the gangs that were in my neighborhood tended to be white gangs. There was a lot of racism.
Wow.
So they would fight with the black gangs,
Oh,
and there was a lot of that growing up. And
did they have any topic to fight on, or it's just anything?
a lot of it was just simply, I don't want you in my neighborhood because you're an
Okay.
African American.
Okay.
And then the drug issue became an issue where gangs would fight over turf for selling drugs.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that. And I knew early on, I was never that person. So unfortunately, the older brothers of my friends were in those types of gangs. And I always looked at that as kind of just, I can't even believe that you would be that way. And unfortunately, some of my friends never grew out of that racism. I've had to cut a couple off in recent years. We've been out here, obviously, we're West Coasters now, but I've been back to visit a couple times, some of my friends in New York, and they never grew out of that racism. And I just can't even be associated with it. I don't enjoy talking to you or spending time with you when you're, saying things of that nature. So I've had to cut a couple of my friends off from New York about that. But yeah, I think out here on the West Coast, it's a pretty white area, pretty Caucasian area. And I think it's good that we kind of talk about those issues. I think a lot of people would prefer them just to go away. Let's not talk about those because they're uncomfortable. But you need to be able to talk about uncomfortable issues if you're going to make progress.
Sure. So how did your growing up get influenced because of all these people or all these kind of things happening around you?
Well, I think I was very self-aware at a young age.
Oh, that's
so,
nice.
Yeah, both on the education front and also on this racism front, and just seeing it up close every day, you say, "Wow, I just had enough of self-awareness to say I don't want to be that.
Sure.
I don't want to be like Bobby.
Sure.
I don't want to do nothing. I don't want to drop out of high school. I don't want to do drugs. I don't want to be in a gang. I want to do something with my life, which was always tied back to education."
That's a very mature thinking.
Yeah, I grew up. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. He went when he was 19 years old, and he never really took on with a career. So he's going to work till the day he dies. He's still in New York with his new wife. And my mom kept our family together. So she was a secretary in the public school system for 30 years, and she always had 2 or 3 jobs to keep our family afloat. And I grew up, for a number of years, I grew up on welfare and food stamps. But it was very clear to me that if I was going to break out of that cycle, it needed an education. I needed to do something different.
Sure.
So we would like to know some top issues of First Legal District.
Oh, sure. As we talked about education, the education funding, the $4 billion problem that we have to fill is, it's going to take up all the oxygen in the room for the next all of 2017's legislative session. So it's the biggest problem that legislators have to fix. And we're under a court order, so it has to happen next year. And they've been kicking the can down the road for 4 years. So that's really the big enchilada. That's the big one that needs to get worked on next year. And then transportation. Those are the 2 big issues in our district.
Sure. Would you like to give a message to First Legal District residents? Probably, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you honor me with your vote, and I become your next state senator, there's a couple of things that I'm going to be focused on, and that's definitely getting results for the community. I'm not going to be bogged down in the partisan politics that's going on in Olympia. Olympia is starting to look a lot like Washington, D.C., and to me that's a serious problem. It's not a question of right or wrong between the 2 parties. It's a question of what makes the most sense for the community and the state. And I will always be focused on results and not partisan politics. So I humbly ask for your vote.
So what are your goals regarding job market and economy?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, we have, in our state, we are one of the fastest growing tech bubbles in the country.
Sure.
Even more down in California, even more than you in California.
Sure.
And I come from Amazon, and a lot of my friends are still there. And we've obviously got Microsoft, we've got Google, we've got all kinds of great tech companies here in Seattle. And they have thousands and thousands of open jobs right now. And one of the big things I want to focus on, and it's not just in tech and STEM, but I want to work on aligning our education system with the jobs that we actually have in the state. So we have, like I said, we've got thousands of, if you're a computer science engineer, if you graduate from the University of Washington, either in Seattle or Bothell, with a computer science degree, you have a job waiting for you the next day, making $70,000 a year plus stock and benefits. Really good paying jobs. And our major employers are not able to fill them, so we're actually importing talent from out of state. So we're, I think, the number 2 importer of baccalaureate degrees. And the problem that we have is just simply a seat issue. So we have tons of kids that are applying and qualified for the UW Comp Science degree, but they don't have enough seats for them, so they're turning kids away.
Oh, okay.
So that just makes no sense.
Sure.
Because, that's just make sure that they're a big enough program that you can take all those kids in, because there's jobs waiting for them.
Sure.
That's one thing that we need to do. The other thing is that we don't necessarily have to have every kid with a 4-year degree. So in our state, there's a number of sectors that are more focused on vocational issues, which also are excellent paying jobs. So in our case, we have aerospace. So our economy runs around Boeing and aerospace. They had a number of long-term engineers and mechanics who retired in recent years. And in the next 10 years, they're going to be losing a lot more. And we don't have the workforce to backfill that.
Sure.
And when you consider that we just got the 777X deal here, which is they're making here, and they have the carbon fiber wing technology, that carbon fiber technology is the future, not only of aerospace, but of car manufacturing and a whole host of other industries that are using that technology. So we have kids in apprenticeship, we can put them in apprenticeship programs, they can get 2-year degrees with industry credentials, and not have to go to a 4-year degree school and still have excellent jobs waiting for them right now. But we're not aligning our educational system with those kids at an early age, so when they're in junior high or they're in high school, they realize that they don't have to go the 4-year college route. They can go a vocational route and have an excellent career waiting for them. So we need to work on aligning those systems as well. And then additionally, the other area is maritime. So the entire Alaskan fishing fleet is going to have to be rebuilt in the next 20 years. And there's huge billions of dollars available from the federal government for shipbuilding. And we have a very robust maritime sector here in Washington State. Again, those kids, we need the workforce for those things, because each one of those boats might be $30–40 million.
Wow.
And we don't have the welders, we don't have the shipbuilders that are here. And again, that's a route that kids can go that have excellent paying jobs.
Sure.
But we're not filling that workforce.
Oh, okay.
So I think that there's a lot that we can do to align the two things, the jobs with the kids and the education system. We have to do a better job of that.
How do you feel about the epidemic of gun violence in the country?
Oh yes, it's a critical issue for sure. Full faith and disclosure, I am a gun owner.
Oh, okay.
So I have a concealed weapons permit, and I have a weapon in my home, and that's for self-defense, just for our home. We live in a rural area, and we're kind of in the woods, and we have some predators. We've had cougars, we've had bears, we've had coyote packs that go through my property.
Wow.
And I've got 3 small kids. Additionally, because we're in a rural area, if I call 911, it might take 20 minutes for a policeman to get to my property.
Oh, okay.
So I have a gun for home protection, but I'm a responsible gun owner, and we have to do more as a society to pass responsible gun responsibility legislation. In our state, we are leading the way. So I think it was 2 years ago. By initiative, we passed Initiative 594, which was a universal background check law.
Oh, okay.
So in our state, you absolutely have to have a background check before you get a firearm. That seems like a common sense thing. Even gun owners like myself support this in high numbers. Even NRA members support this. So we led the way, and you're starting to see that take off in other states around the country as well. So we're leading the way in Washington on that issue. This year we have, I think it's Initiative 1491, which is a extreme risk protection order, which basically what that does is if you are a family member of somebody who is mentally ill, and that person is showing signs of either doing harm to themselves or to other people, you can go to the court and petition to have their firearms taken away temporarily for a year. You have only family members can do this, or the police if they have documented evidence, and the judge still has to say yes. So there's due process. It should not be an issue where people use it in a divorce to get back at somebody or anything like that. You actually have to go through the due process of a court hearing. But that makes a lot of sense to me. And if you have people, the intersection of mental health and gun ownership and mass shootings is clear based on the data. We had a shooting here in Seattle a few years ago at a Cafe Racer, where that was exactly the case, where somebody in the family, they knew that this person was at a crisis level and was going to do harm to people, but they couldn't deal with it through the court system, and he eventually shot people. So I think we need all kinds of new laws that are focused on responsible gun ownership. Another one is child endangerment. We don't have a new law for this yet, but we might. Where if you allow your firearm to be used by a child in the furtherance of a crime, in any crime, in my opinion, we should have extremely strict penalties for you. You know, I have my gun locked up. My kids cannot go to my gun. If you're dumb enough to allow your gun to be used in a crime by a child, you should have some severe consequences for that. So raising the penalties for that is something that I think I would like to work on in the legislature if I get there. So we need to do everything in our power to kind of curtail that violence. I don't think we're ever going to, you know, we have the Second Amendment in this country, and obviously I support that. But there's things that we can do to make us safer.
Mm-hmm. This definitely helps the society. It's scary out there.
Yes, it is.
Oh my God. There is a city called San Bernardino near where I live,
Yes.
and there was a shootout, and oh my God, we were scared.
I know.
We were scared. What are your environmental goals?
Yes, environmental goals are big with me. I consider myself to be an environmentalist. There's two major goals that I have. The Puget Sound, which is our big body of water here, we need to save the Puget Sound. So ocean acidification and runoff, toxic runoff from roads, from industrial process, are basically killing the Puget Sound. And it can be anything from making sure that our fish culverts, we're under a court order to spend, I think it's $2.4 billion to fix fish culverts, to fix fish culverts so that salmon can actually spawn, and ultimately that's important because then our orcas won't survive if they don't have salmon to eat. So it's all related. So saving the Puget Sound for our children and grandchildren is a big goal of mine, and that has to do a lot with stormwater runoff mitigation. The other one is just reducing our carbon emissions. So I think, you know, every state, every country needs to do their role in reducing carbon emissions. My opponent doesn't think that's an important priority for the state because she thinks it puts us at a competitive disadvantage with other states, which, you know, to me doesn't make a lot of sense. But, you know, in our state, I think, again, this is where I come at it from a slightly different perspective than folks in my party for the most part. When you look at the data for where carbon emissions come from in Washington, 55% come from transportation. So people driving their cars, trucks, on-road diesel and gas fumes. And that's much higher than the national average. So the national average is down in the 30s. So we have a very, very clean energy production sector because we have hydroelectric dams, which don't produce a lot of emissions in the state. So we're actually number 2 in the entire country for the low carbon intensity of our electric generation. So that's really not an issue for us. The issue is transportation fumes. And I think that we've got a little bit of a silver bullet there because if we can move people to electric vehicles using the clean hydropower that we already have here, which is, you know, mostly emission free, that's the win. So you're never going to tell somebody that they have to get an electric vehicle. But as the price comes down and as the options in the free market expand for the types of electric vehicles you can buy, people are going to move that way if you can just make it easy for them. So things like having wiring already in new homes in their garage that can plug in for the superchargers, making sure that supercharging stations are readily available through public-private partnerships so that people know, you know, because that big mental hurdle, I don't know if I'm going to buy an electric vehicle because I don't know if I can get far enough to my work and that kind of thing. Well, if there's massive charging stations everywhere, it's not going to be an issue. It makes it easier. The purchase decision becomes easier for the consumer. And then also moving fleets of trucks to probably natural gas. So right now they're running diesel fuel. There's really not electric vehicle Mack trucks at this stage. Maybe one day we'll have those and that'll be great. But in the meantime, we can move those fleets over to natural gas, which is much cleaner as a fuel. And I think if we can attack that as a problem, not only is it going to help our environment and cut down our emissions, but it's also a huge jobs program. Because what we're talking about is infrastructure spending. So the more we get people working in construction, the better our economy does.
Maybe public transportation vehicle which runs on electricity.
Yes.
That resolves the traffic issue and the carbon dioxide issue.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot to mention that. Absolutely, especially in our district on I-405. we don't really have a good transit option. You can't really. We've got park and rides in Bothell, for example, that are full at 7 a.m. So if you're not one of the first people there at the beginning of the day, you don't get a spot.
Sure.
And then we don't have mass transit that runs on, let's say, electric buses up and down the corridor with big park and rides where you can just park your car and get on the bus, and the bus doesn't even get out of the lane on 4. They call it inline on 405. That would be great. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Light rail is also an option as well, but bus rapid transit, especially with electric buses, is a much easier thing to implement, shorter time frame to implement, and you get better bang for your buck.
Sure.
So yeah, absolutely that as well. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I appreciate all your time. I thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers.
I wish you good luck for your election.
Thank you very much. I hope we get to talk again after I become a senator.
I'm sure. I'll see you again.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.